Avengers Endgame takes place shortly after the events of Infinity War, with the remaining heroes coming to terms with their defeat in the previous film. The downtrodden heroes must now pick themselves up and find a way to gain back what they've lost. This is a spoiler-free review, so I won't be revealing any major plot points or anything, but I will be outlining the general motions of the story without specifics to better express my opinions. With all that said, here's my review. The MCU is known for its likable characters, easily digestible plots, and signature humor. Endgame, however, much like Infinity War, is very disobedient in following the familiar formula. Instead, Endgame presents itself as a contemplative film, focusing on depression, the results of loss, and desperation, particularly in the first and strongest act. The first few scenes seemingly build towards a breakneck pace before pulling the rug out from under us and switching gears, opting for a slow burn to settle the viewers into the new world created by Thanos' snap. We see these idealistic heroes at their most vulnerable, stripped of their confidence and swimming in their own self-hatred, yet trying to keep a positive demeanor in spite of all that. I admire the film for taking such a mature and grounded approach to character study, and for portraying the mascots of the franchise in such a dire light. Often, the melodramatics of the MCU feel half-baked or cheesy, but here, the emotional weight of the first act resonates thunderously, with a powerfully somber tone and self-reflective atmosphere. Even the cinematography complements the mood with slow tracking movements, intimate shots, and cold colorization. The filmmakers truly let us experience what this hopeless new world feels like. The second act is where the plot gains momentum and the Avengers' plan is set in motion. The build-up to the action is well handled and genuinely exciting. Many of the set pieces that follow are quite familiar, for better and for worse. And though consistently entertaining, this portion of the film could have done with some fat trimming. Endgame is a 3-hour movie that simultaneously flies by, due to its enjoyment factor, and shows its length, because of its density. However, the movie didn't require such a beefy runtime and should have been edited to a much tighter duration. For instance, the second act features an extended scene of course correction because the Avengers' initial plan had a hiccup, and it's entirely unnecessary, padding out the film with fan service. The third act is ambitious in scale and has several moments that'll have fans roaring with enthusiasm. Endgame earns its moniker as an event film during this space of the movie. While the final confrontation is a sight to behold, especially on the big screen, it is rather unmemorable when all is said and done. The first few parts are fantastic and thrilling, but as time passes, it becomes more of a backdrop to character interactions. Unfortunately, this is where some of the MCU's weakest aspects begin to creep in. Ill-timed comedic beats, quippy lines to accompany the next transition, and halting activity in favor of character exchanges despite the danger surrounding them. Each of these elements take away from the spectacle and gravity that the third act offers. Additionally, there are many instances of fan service that also bog down this portion of the movie, serving as distractions or opposing the film's tone. As for the resolution, I know I'm in the minority for thinking this, but I was quite unsatisfied with how things turned out. Endgame concludes by wrapping everything up in a little bow, but the wrapping is very sloppy. What could have been an emotionally fulfilling ending is instead hollow, questionable, and even slightly aggravating. Just as Infinity War had the difficult task of juggling numerous characters, Endgame must perform a similar trick, and it does so successfully. The relationships between characters old and new are varied and intriguing to watch. Furthermore, certain characters are taken in fresh and unexpected directions. A shining example of this is Hawkeye, who was not taken well to Thanos' new reality. Without getting too specific, Hawkeye is now a broken man who exacts justice on his own terms in retaliation of something he can do nothing about, and it plays out brilliantly on screen. On the other hand, some characters were not treated as well. The Hulk undergoes a surprising alteration that completely goes against what the character represents. The change was seemingly made out of convenience and to rack up more laughs from the audience, which I think is a shallow compromise. Thanos' modification makes his involvement in the story much less personal, which ends up being disappointing to say the least. But Thor's conversion is the most objectionable. Thor's method of coping with his failure in defeating Thanos when he had the chance is both comedic and tragic. However, the tragedy is rapidly placed on the back burner, and the film decides to continuously use him as a limitless resource for low-hanging jokes, which is an inexcusable downgrade from the Asgardian we saw in Thor Ragnarok and Infinity War. Robert Downey Jr. continues to be a revelation in the role of Tony Stark. He perfectly balances the snarky know-it-all with the emotional man behind the mask, and somehow gives what may be his best performance as the character. Similarly, Chris Evans has never been better as Steve Rogers than he is here. Captain America is usually a bland person in these films whose decisions are too easily made and whose morals are never properly challenged. While nothing about this really changes in Endgame, barring a downright betrayal of the character in the final minutes, Evans manages to give the old soldier more life than the script might permit. Chris Hemsworth embraces the new take on Thor, relishing in the humorous bits and selling the few dramatic moments he's offered. Given how drastically different the Hulk is in this movie, Mark Ruffalo is dealt an odd hand in playing the role. He does what he can with the material, though, which ultimately results in a hit-and-miss performance. Scarlett Johansson is an unforeseen highlight of the picture, bringing real dramatic heft to Black Widow, who has undergone a subtle but noticeable personality shift since the last film. Once the joke of the MCU, Hawkeye is one of the more engrossing personalities in Endgame, thanks to the script and Jeremy Renner's performance. Clint's current situation allows Renner to explore avenues of the character that were not previously available, which in turn makes Hawkeye one of the more memorable figures amidst this gargantuan lineup. Josh Brolin stole the show in Infinity War as Thanos. Unfortunately, the Mad Titan is heavily sidelined for this feature, but that doesn't hinder Brolin's performance one bit. He commands the screen every second he appears and further exemplifies why Thanos is such a well-realized villain. Where Infinity War is remarkably accessible to those unfamiliar with the series, Endgame essentially requires viewers to have done their homework by watching the previous films. That's not something to be held against this movie, though. It is the latest installment of an 11-year-old franchise, after all. There are a large number of callbacks to prior entries that will easily alienate the uninitiated. Some of these are terribly clever, the sequence in the elevator comes to mind, while others are simply played for laughs, which brings me to my next issue with the film. The MCU has a bad habit of ruining crucial or meaningful scenes with an unneeded joke, and that behavior extends to Endgame. Once the plot is in motion, the humor is ramped up considerably, frequently diminishing the importance of many events. Endgame is strongest when paving its own path, but falters when following in the footsteps of most other MCU movies. As the culmination of a story built over the course of 22 films, Avengers Endgame delivers on many of its unspoken promises. The character dynamics are compelling, the story lives up to the massive scope, and there are dozens of gratifying moments that will force a smile on any cynic's face. The first act is almost masterful in execution, plunging this typically cheerful and lighthearted world into a grief-stricken, gloomy reality. The second and third acts are strong, but adherence to franchise formula and some questionable choices, especially for the latter third, hamper their potential quality. The cast is on top form, though, and Alan Silvestri produces an epic score that ebbs and flows with the film beautifully. The resolution leaves a lot to be desired, with the final confrontation concluding anticlimactically, and most of the original 6 being utterly shafted by the end. Despite its faults, which are often the product of ambitious sights, Avengers Endgame is quality blockbuster cinema that should be experienced in a packed theater on the biggest screen possible. I give this film a B+. So those are my thoughts on the film. The more I dwell on it, the more my opinion fluctuates, both positively and negatively. As of right now, though, this is where I stand on it. But more importantly, what did you think of Avengers Endgame? Do you agree with me? Did this movie live up to your expectations? Tell me about it in the comments section. And, if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel for similar content, as that would really help me out. See you in the next video.